everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Number One Comics Podcast. This is the only podcast that is dedicated to the review and discussion of first issues. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me is Bill. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm great, Jonah. How are you?
Excellent. I'm doing well, as well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
And as you can see, today we are talking about a comic that was part of a industry revolution, so to speak. And I'm sure we'll talk about the other comics that were part of this revolution as well. But this is none other than Jim Lee's WildCATs #1. This was published by Image Comics back in 1992, August of 1992. And it had a cover price of $1.95 on it. So Jim Lee is the co-creator, writer, and penciler of this issue. Brandon Choi is a co-creator and writer. And then Scott Williams was the inker on this issue. You're familiar with Image Comics, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What was your experience with them? Like, tell me a little bit about Image Comics for you back in the 90s.
Of course, my introduction to Image Comics was Spawn.
Okay.
And then, of course, big Jim Lee fan.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got big into them, but they were more like, I'd go to the comic book section of the grocery store while my mom was shopping, and I'd thumb through them and read through them and stuff like that. And I was gravitated more towards like the Jim Lee stuff because huge fan of Jim Lee. And I love the WildCATs. I actually there was a during the heyday of like Saturday morning cartoons, there was a WildCATs show on CBS.
Yep. It's on Tubi.
Is
you
it
can
really?
still watch it.
Oh, that's awesome.
It might have been better when you were like 13 years old.
I'm sure it probably was.
As I was reviewing, as I was doing my notes for this book, I was actually watching it.
Were you?
And I was like, and for one, that theme song is atrocious.
Right.
With the rap music, the rapping going on behind it is very strange. And the animation, like starting out, I was like, oh, it's very like X-Men-ish animation, but then it really is not. It's almost like Wish.com X-Men animation.
Yeah.
And the voice acting is weird. I mean, it just did not hold up.
Right.
And there's only 13 episodes, so you can easily like sit down and pound out. If you can get through in one sitting 13 episodes, that I think is a superhuman feat. But it would not take you long to watch the entire series.
Right.
So.
Well, and like most heroes and comics and stuff like that we talk about, my first exposure to a lot of Image was trading cards.
Oh, yeah.
They had the ones where they were like comic book panels and stuff like that. So that's how I learned about like Spawn, Shadowhawk, I think it was, something like that.
Yep, Shadowhawk had his own trading card set. Yep.
I learned a lot about of course, WildCATs, Gen 13, that sort of stuff.
I remember, as a real quick aside, so it was Marvel Series 1 trading cards that really got me into comics overall. And that was where you had like the heroes, the villains, you had the bio on the back, a quick breakdown of their powers, maybe it was like measuring their abilities kind of thing. And then you had like famous team ups, you had like arc enemies, it was like Wolverine versus Sabretooth kind of thing. And then the first time I picked up a set of trading cards that was more like what you're talking about, where it was like the comic panels, it was the X-Force trading cards.
Yeah, I remember those.
So I picked up a pack or a box, I think it was, of the X-Force trading cards.
Yeah.
Thinking I was going to get that of like the bios and the individual pictures, and it was nothing but like the comic panels. And even for that one, it was like mostly because that set came out right around the first issue of X-Force. I think it must not have been too long after, because it was all like New Mutants comic panels.
Right.
And so I was like, what's this bullshit? Like, I didn't like it at all.
Right.
I like it better now going back, because I've got like the Wolverine sets, the Ghost Rider sets, the Punisher set, the Image sets. And so I have them and I like them for what they are. But I just remember that my first experience with that was with that X-Force set. I was like, this is so stupid. This is not what I wanted.
Well, and I will say, though, I was aware of what WildCATs was. I saw the animated series before I ever read my first WildCATs comic.
Okay.
And the animated series does not do the comics justice at all.
No.
It's
absolutely
it's
not.
like you said, Wish.com kind of X-Men kind of thing. But really, when you think about the cartoons we watched, on Saturday mornings, a lot of it was to sell toys.
I would say almost 100% of it was, other than like
Batman the Animated Series.
There was some that may not have had toys even associated with them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for the most, Wacky Racers was not out there to sell toys.
Right.
But yeah, your X-Men, your WildCATs, because your Iron Man, your Hulk, anything really comic book related did have a toy line associated with it. Even Batman the Animated Series had a toy line.
Right.
And so, yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah.
I think I've got notes on it for later on too, but there were WildCATs toys also. We'll talk more about those. Unlike the Wetworks episode that by the time people see this episode, it will have been out. That had I did pick up toys for that, but I didn't pick up any WildCATs toys because they're so fucking terrible.
Right.
They're so bad.
Well, and I guess I always saw it as just like, oh, great, it's another X-Men ripoff kind of thing. But that totally changed the first time I ever picked up a WildCATs comic.
Yeah.
So
let's talk a little bit more about that. And I guess going back to the beginning, so this goes back to, again, 1992. Several high-profile artists had broken off from their work-for-hire gigs, mostly, with Marvel Comics, I think was the big one. And they formed a publishing company called Image Comics. Mm-hmm. And the idea was that those creators would publish their own material without giving up the copyrights to the properties. So it was creator-owned properties. Jim Lee was one of those creators, and WildCATs was his first published work for that new comic publisher. This series marked kind of the starting point for his Wildstorm universe, which we'll talk about that a bit because Wildstorm universe, it got pretty big.
It did.
Overall. Yeah. It included titles like Stormwatch, which is one of my favorites. We'll definitely do a review on that at some point here soon. Wetworks, which we've just briefly discussed, and we've got an episode on that out. And then Gen 13, which that's admittedly one I never got into. And I don't know, maybe I'll go back and check it out at some point, but I know that was a very popular title for a while as well.
I more got aware of that from Wizard. From Wizard
100%.
Magazine.
Wizard shoved so much Image stuff down our throats at the time. Everything I learned or knew about most of Image Comics, and not just Image Comics, Dark Horse and Valiant, because I was primarily just a Marvel guy.
Yeah,
but I learned so much about these other properties through Wizard Magazine.
Me too.
So talk a little bit about the cover here. So it features the characters in the book along with the Starburst first senses-shattering issue. I don't know what senses it's shattering. It's like my taste buds or I don't know what, but my eyeballs. But let's really quickly just kind of run down some of the characters. So the first one we got Spartan, and he's a cyborg, and his backstory has been reworked time and time again. So I honestly couldn't tell you what he is today, but I think back around the time he was essentially a character that could essentially die and then have his memory or his brain waves downloaded into another Spartan body. He's got, strength, endurance, flight, and he can fire plasma blasts out of his hand. And then you've got Grifter, who is a member of Team 7, which we discussed during the Wetworks discussion. He's a skilled fighter and a marksman. He's probably, I would say, maybe one of the biggest breakout characters from this book, as far as being able to hold his own series and also being able to more seamlessly guest star in other books, even outside of Wildstorm continuity. Yeah. You could throw Grifter into pretty much anything and it would make some sort of sense or not feel completely out of place.
Well, and he was always my favorite character of WildCATs anyway, because he was, you always like the cool, badass characters.
He's got a cool look. I mean, he's got a trench coat and pouches and guns, and he's got a cool mask, but it still shows off his nicely coiffed hair. I mean, what's not to like about Grifter? He's awesome. Yeah. We've got Zealot, which is and I'll explain these terms in just a moment. She's a cherubim and a Coda warrior. Coda is like the Amazons of the Wildstorm universe, so to speak, in that they're kind of, female warriors. There's Voodoo, who is a telepath and a human. She's a human, cherubim, and daemonite hybrid. And again, if anyone's listening to this, I'm like, was that even English? I'll explain that in a second. She can see the daemonites in their kind of original form. Think of like the glasses from They Live with Roddy Piper. Mm-hmm. She can see them in their true form. The daemonites have this ability to possess the bodies of others, but she can kind of see through that. We've got Maul. He is a human Titanthrope hybrid. I got to be honest, I didn't Google this. I don't even know if Titanthrope's a real word or if that was made up for this character.
Right.
But I'm assuming that's somebody who can change mass, like they can change their size. It's interesting, though, is the bigger he gets, the dumber he gets. And I think that's sort of an interesting concept on the, like, you don't see that with like Ant-Man or Goliath. When he like gets super big, he doesn't get dumber. So I think that was interesting. And then the last one, we've got Warblade. He is a human cherubim hybrid, and he can transform his body into basically like liquid living metal. Think T-1000, right? Yeah. And then shape himself into bladed weapons and sharp objects. There's Void, who has the ability to see the future and teleport herself and others. And then lastly, we've got Lord Emp, a.k.a. Jacob Marlowe. He is a cherubim lord, and he's the owner of the Halo Corporation, and he's the one behind, kind of the behind the scenes and the leader and advisor. He's just a little guy. I want to clear up some of those terms that I threw out before, because this whole book revolves around a centuries-long war between two alien factions or alien races. You've got the human-looking, nearly immortal cherubim, with the, they've all mostly got exceptional powers and skills, and then you've got this more reptilian daemonite group. They have the ability of possessing host bodies. The cherubim had traveled to Earth, bred with humans, and populated the Earth with these half-breeds. And that's what a lot of this team is made up of, are these half-breeds. And then daemonites, they can also boast their own kind of superhuman powers and abilities. So that's really the breakdown or the rundown of what the series is comprised of. Let's go through the first issue and give you a quick synopsis. So we're going to open up in the past. This opens up back in 1980, and we've got two men that are in Antarctica investigating what appears to be a meteorite crater. When a mysterious orb appears, and this is followed by a being in all silver. She vanishes just as quickly as she appeared. We then cut to the future. Well, kind of a day into the future, anyway, which is the International Operations, or IO, division, Crisis Control Center, and they're seeing footage of an explosion in Georgetown. There's men in this sort of crisis center that are discussing, containment processes, a cover story, and then asking, what may have really happened. It's noted that one body has been recovered and ID'd, and that is a dwarf named, and it kind of like tailors off, but it's a dwarf named Jacob Marlowe. Before the sentence can really be finished, the silvery figure from the past suddenly appears here and then, says something cryptic and then vanishes again. We then cut to 1990, which is technically in the past from, kind of where the story really takes place, but just a couple of years. And there is a dwarf named Jacob Marlowe. He's asleep in an alleyway. There's two ne'er-do-wells that approach to mug him because, again, as we discussed with the last episode, you were going to always be mugged if you were in an alleyway, right? That was one of my childhood fears.
Right.
So these two men approach him, which is funny because I don't know what they think they're going to take off of a homeless guy sleeping in an alleyway anyway, but it doesn't mean they're not going to at least try. Jacob is able to defend himself. He surprises himself because he's got kind of this energy blast that comes from his hand. But even with that, the two attackers do gain the upper hand. And I think one of them even kind of cuts him a little bit. But a woman appears in silver. It's the woman we've seen previously in the previous two scenes. She calls herself Void, and she appears to save him. She tells Jacob that he was once one of the four lords and a champion of mankind called Lord Emp. She's been sent to prepare him for a coming war against the rising cabal. And that's really all we're given on that. We then cut to now, or to today, which is 1992. And we again see Jacob Marlowe asleep in the alleyway. Again, he looks like he's been there a while. He wakes up, he's mumbling about something that happened in a dream, but really it wasn't a dream. It was, strangely enough, he's referencing events that happened in an issue of a comic that hasn't even come out yet, which is Cyberforce #1.
Okay.
I don't even think that issue had hit yet when this one had come out.
Right.
So I thought that was funny. But anyway, so Marlowe stumbles out of the alley. He, almost gets plowed down by a taxi cab. He stumbles into a high rise and hops into the elevator, and he's on his way up to the penthouse. And on the ride up, he's with a couple of others in the elevator, and he's getting fresh clothes, a haircut. He's got the cucumbers over the eyes. By the time he reaches the top floor, he steps out looking like $1 million. Void is waiting for him. She reaffirms his destiny. Void tells him about a dream that she has in which she is attacked by a mysterious man with an orb. In the attack, time and space are halted, and she finds herself lost in different planes of existence all at once. I gotta be honest, that's really a lot to take from somebody. Like, as soon as you step into a room and you haven't even had your first cup of coffee yet,
right?
Like, if they just unload that on you,
it's lady, I'm hungover. Leave me alone.
Yeah, and which he clearly was hungover, which I think is why he was sleeping in the alleyway.
Right.
I don't know, because I hadn't read that issue of Cyberforce yet. It makes really about as much sense to me when she says it as it did when I read it. I was like, I really don't know what she's talking about. And maybe that's the point.
Right.
So Jacob and Void, they take up kind of a platform elevator that lowers down to a hangar where Spartan is waiting for them. He's been updating the kind of their ship that they use, their Blackbird, so to speak. It's called a MIRV, MIRV. He's been making updates to the ship, and he also updates them on the team's training. However, before he can really kind of finish that update, he's bowled over by one of his teammates who gets knocked through a wall by another. It's Warblade that knocks into him, and it's Maul that had knocked him through the wall. We cut to a submersible ship beneath the Chesapeake where an evil cabal is meeting. The leader is Lord Hellspawn, and he's waxing poetic about the beginning of the reunification and a mole that they've planted in their government. He also remarks that one of the men in that room with them right there had betrayed the cabal. Pike is a Deadpool-looking enforcer for Lord Hellspawn. He grabs that traitor and essentially shoves his head into a plate of spaghetti and drowns him in it. Hellspawn comments that his death is of little consolation, and they must find the third gifted one before her whereabouts can be sold to Jacob. So, speaking of Jacob, he's gone to see a being called the Gnome, which confused me when you have a dwarf character and then you've got another character who's called the Gnome. I, for a second, thought they were referring to one and the same.
Right.
That Jacob was the Gnome, but he's not. Jacob was going to see a person called the Gnome. The Gnome is going to give Jacob the location of the girl that the Cabal is also seeking in exchange for a favor, and Jacob accepts. So then we cut to Georgetown, where a man named Cole walks into a strip club. And this place is hopping, and he's talking to the bartender, why is this place so popular? The bartender points to the stage as the reason why, and on stage is a dancer called Voodoo. Cole thinks he thinks these thoughts as he's looking at Voodoo, and it reminded me of Naked Gun when Drebin first meets Priscilla Presley's character. It's what it reminded me of. So among these thoughts, I'm just going to read a few of them. And I'm not even going to try and do it in my best Drebin voice because I don't know that I've got a good Drebin voice. Let's see here. I'm going to try this, right?
Okay.
Bear with me, audience. She had a full set of curves and the kind of legs you'd like to suck on for a day. She was giving him a look he could feel in his hip pocket. There we go. That's all I got. Quoting the Naked Gun. But that aligns with Cole's thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. What else does he say? Oh, he says, he does say, the Lord loves a working woman. That is what he says, which made me laugh out loud. Anyway.
Oh, God.
It turns out that Cole was also sent to find this voodoo. Cole is so distracted by her that he nearly misses the 3 bad guys that walk into the club. These guys are the ones that are sent by the Cabal to find her. One of the bad guys approaches the stage, and Voodoo shrieks as she can see him for what he really is. So she can see his Daemonite form. The bad guys grab Voodoo and begin opening fire in the club, sending people running for their lives. Cole slides a mask over his face, and he immediately gets mistaken for a Youngblood character. That's referenced there. The bad guys recognize him as Grifter. Releasing their grip on the girl, they activate these things called flash suits, which give them extra armor and armaments. Now, Grifter is able to take them both out with a few well-placed headshots. The WildCATs see the report of the shootout on the news, and they know that it's the Cabal that's going after the girl, so they kind of jump into action. Grifter faces off against the last of the bad guys, which is this Coda warrior. Grifter takes her down, if even only temporary. He tells Voodoo that if she wants to live, she needs to follow him. Before they can even move, however, a second squad of Cabal arrives. The Coda attacker is back on her feet as well. Now, luckily, the WildCATs have arrived, and they're there to essentially save the day. They engage the Cabal. One of the bad guys grabs Jacob, he's literally just standing there watching them smoking a cigar, which I love. That's so awesome. Jacob is saved by another Coda warrior who arrives, and this is a close companion of Grifter, and her name is Zealot. She essentially stands there like she owns the joint, is kind of Grifter's narration for that. And that she's an avenging angel with a body worth killing for. She's sex and violence all rolled together with a bad attitude is how he sums her up. After Jacob and Zealot meet, it's decided that they all need to get back to the WildCATs base. As the team prepares to exfil, however, the evil Coda lady, she sets off an explosion that levelizes pretty much the entire block. And that leaves the team apparently dead. Our last scene, we learn who Hellspawn's mole in the government is. Did you recognize him when you read the comic?
I didn't.
No? Okay. It's Vice President Dan Quayle is the mole in the government.
Wow.
Now, considering there is an issue too, I think it's safe to say the team probably survives the explosion, but I love when a monthly leaves off on a cliffhanger like that. So
yeah,
love that part of it.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the review. Bill, what are your thoughts on this story?
Honestly, I think this blows X-Men out of the water.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
Now, when you say blow, are you talking specifically Jim Lee's X-Men #1 or just X-Men as a whole?
I'm talking about Jim Lee's X-Men #1.
Okay.
Because, as we've discussed before, big fan of that.
Yeah.
Right. But I like the less is more approach they take with WildCATs. where it's, you don't have a blue team and a gold team. You just have this this core group, and you're getting introduced to them and everything like that. This, if I was to read WildCATs #1 and X-Men #1 today, I'd probably go with WildCATs.
Yeah. It's the thing I like about this type of an origin story is we get to sort of meet, the team is kind of brought together more organically.
Yeah.
With X-Men #1, they were already a team that had been around for 40 years.
Right, and they had like 1 million members, so they had to split them into two teams.
And then you think of other books where you're just kind of like dropped into the teams already formed, or they purposefully go out seeking out to build the team. We see that in a lot of origin stories.
Yeah.
This one reminded me kind of when we talked about, New Avengers #1 and how organically that team came together, where it was kind of a crisis that happened and these characters just show up.
Yeah.
So what you have here is you've got just characters with different agendas showing up kind of at the same place, same time, and that's sort of how your team gets put together.
Yeah.
And I like that aspect of it.
Well, and I also thought kind of back in the day, maybe it was because I read more Marvel than I did anything else, but it seemed like Image got to push the envelope a little bit more. They were a little more risque, they kind of showed more skin, and like they...
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Like they're, they're in a strip club. They're, shooting people in the face. Like they did stuff that like you don't see on like Spider-Man.
Right.
Or Captain America, for example. You know?
No, 100%. It's funny because, we talk about, Jim Lee's X-Men. Jim Lee was probably the first example of me paying attention to an artist's work.
Yeah.
Prior to that, it was a character I followed, or it was a, maybe if the cover looked cool, I would pick it up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really until him that I was like, oh, this is a Jim Lee book. I want to see what that looks like.
Yeah,
or I want to check that out. And I still would argue his work on X-Men #1 sort of transformed comics to me. And I think it gave birth to, they were already referring to comics at that time as the modern era, but I think it really gave birth to the modern era of comic books as I think about it.
Absolutely.
And this is sort of just an extension of that. In fact, I think all of Image's, for better or worse, all of Image's original core titles is sort of that birth of this modern era of comic books that we live in today.
Yeah. Well, you talk about an artist, like paying more attention to the art. I think there's very few that I can specifically say, like, if I see that artist's work on a cover, I'll pick it up immediately. Jim Lee is one of them, and Frank Miller is definitely another one of them.
Yep. I went through. I've never really been like if they're doing the interiors, that's probably when I'm really going to want to pick it up because there's so many covers out there with so many cover artists.
Yeah, like the cover looks amazing, and then you open up the comic and it's
garbage.
Yeah.
Fool me once. I've been fooled by that plenty of times.
Yeah.
As a kid, I only picked up the kind of the first few issues of this series. I didn't really follow it very closely. Even now, I don't have a full run of this. I want to get a full run, and I can probably pick one up on eBay relatively inexpensively.
Yeah.
But it's been one of those I just kind of like pieced together through dollar bins, because that's really where you're going to find the majority of these issues is in dollar bins.
Yeah.
I'll piece together through dollar bins as I have an opportunity to search for it. But I mean, as a kid, I didn't really follow it. It jumps around in time a little bit. You started in 1980, you go to like 1990, and then you like a day in the future or a day in the past. So it jumped around a little bit as a kid, and I remember like as a kid being like, I don't really know what's going on in this book.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the Coda was. I didn't know what the Cherubim was. I didn't know what the Daemonites were, because there wasn't really any reference given to those things at this point in time.
Yeah.
And they're dropping these things in little by little, but again, as a child, I was like, I felt lost.
Yeah.
When just rereading this book for the purpose of this show as an adult, I tried to take everything that I'd learned about the Wildstorm universe and sort of over the last 30 years, and sort of kind of not forget it all, but sort of put it on the back burner and kind of look at it from a fresh perspective. Like that 12-year-old me reading it all over again, essentially what I wanted here.
Yeah.
And I can really see where 12-year-old Jonah was confused by what was going on.
Right.
There's references, like I said, there's references to events in a book that I don't even think had been released yet. Why was Marlowe waking up in the alleyway when he clearly had, was no longer a transient? Like, the guy's a billionaire at this point, and he's still sleeping in the alleyway.
Yeah, why isn't he in the penthouse or something like that? Yeah.
What are the Coda? What's the Cherubim? What's the Daemonites, etc.? There's just a lot of questions. And again, as 12-year-old me, that the mole on the last page, I'm like, as an adult, I remember who it is, but as a kid, I was like, oh, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Like, but I think it's supposed to be like a big reveal. Like, if you recognize him as Dan Quayle,
right?
Like, that's a big reveal. He was vice president at the time,
right? And
so that was a pretty big reveal. It's just funny how, like, in retrospect, how many people either don't remember who the vice president was in 1992, and what that person looked like. Right. It's very easy. So I think if someone goes back and rereads this for the first time, they're going to be just as lost as 12-year-old Jonah was. They're going to be like, who the hell is this guy?
Right.
I'm definitely, one thing I liked about this is we are introduced to a load of characters, and we didn't get to know many of them very well, because there is a lot going on in this issue. But the ones that we do get to know a little bit about, like the Grifter and the, Lord Emp or Jacob Marlowe, and even we learn a little bit more about Zealot just from what Grifter describes than we do about Maul or Warblade, which I think is why those kind of become like early breakout characters, because that's who I think sort of were meant to focus on initially, but I think it does a pretty good job of juggling all the characters overall. I'm definitely a different kind of reader than I was back then, and I'm a lot more patient.
Yeah,
and so I can see what they're doing here, where they're like just dropping seeds, and I don't need all the information at once. I don't need the Chris Claremont-esque expository dialogue giving me a full page breakdown of the Cherubim Daemonite War for the purpose of enjoying this issue for what it is.
Yeah.
So I liked that aspect of it. One of the things, and I think probably one of the reasons why you like this so much, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I love about this title is how different every character looks from one another.
Yeah.
You compare that against a lot of Image titles, like take a Cyberforce, for example, where those characters are almost, or even Wetworks, where they're all fucking gold with big guns. Yeah. They're almost indiscernible from one another.
Exactly.
And here, they all look very, very different. And I really love that. It gets to the point with, like several of those Image titles where, like I said, you can't tell who's who from one another. And I think that's something that really all of the Wildstorm titles did pretty well.
Yeah, I would say so.
More so than a lot of the others. So not only does each character look different, they all look very cool. Grifter looks cool. I was always a huge fan of Spartan's design. I think Spartan looks awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's good, and almost to the point, like Grifter in particular, like it's almost become like a timeless look.
Yeah,
like some of the characters do look very 90s, but you take a character like Grifter, you could plop him into a comic book today, and he would look just as good today as he would have, 30 years ago. So, like I said, we're not given a lot of, we're not given a lot on the formation of the team. In particular, like we don't really know yet why Jacob Marlowe's put this team together, other than the bits of pieces that were given about this war that's coming. He's got to be prepared for it. These are the people that's going to help him fight it. We don't know where he found Warblade. We don't know where he found Maul yet. We don't know much about their backstories yet. The other thing I was going to mention is the story itself. It is pretty straightforward. Despite those jumps in time that I talked about, it is a very straightforward story. Characters X, Y, and Z converge on this point, and there's a battle, and then we're left on a cliffhanger.
Right.
There's really not a lot to it. And I think that that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
I do love it when it comes to serialized comics when it does end on a cliffhanger, like I'd mentioned, because what it does is it made me want to open up. As soon as I was done reading this, I wanted to open up the second issue and see, all right, how did they survive? Where did they end up? Did Void teleport them out right away, or what happened there? Are any of them injured? Who's the body that they found? Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go in and see that. I think it's rare these days. Well, it's especially rare these days, how a team book with a big cast of never before seen characters, you don't see that anymore.
Yeah.
And so that was refreshing, as well as to go back and look at a team like this, like their first appearance. No one's ever seen these characters before, ever.
Yeah.
And you don't have that anymore. And I miss those days. It's so rare that I pick up a team book and I'm like, oh, these are brand new people. I've never seen them before. I miss that, and I want more of that.
Yeah.
So, to anyone in the comic book working community, give me more of that, please. What are any other thoughts that you want to mention on the book?
Almost like, you reference, like there's a point in here where he references a comic that hasn't even come out yet, right? It kind of reminds me of like the Netflix Marvel series that came out, like the Daredevil and Jessica Jones, all that stuff, where like you had to read or you had to watch like season 1 of Daredevil and then like season 1 and 2 of this, and then go back and watch season 1 of Iron Fist. And, kind of jump back and forth. So I would love to see an omnibus of this, but it would almost have to be like, maybe issue 1 and 2 of WildCATs, and then like issue whatever of like Wildstorm, and
Yeah.
I'd like to see something kind of like that put together, just kind of like how the MCU movies aren't all in order. You have to go and watch them in a certain...
Right. Yeah, I think I do have one kind of collected crossover event from Wildstorm. I think it's their... I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's going to bother me. It might come to me. I'm sure I've got it written down here somewhere. But anyway, it's not very good.
Oh.
But it does exactly what you're talking about, where it kind of collects all that stuff together in that fashion. Let's talk a little bit about what came next. So this series lasted like 50 issues, which is cool. And it did see several writers that had come on board over the years to give it kind of their own spin. That included James Robinson and Alan Moore, which I don't know if it was common at that time for Moore to kind of come on and take over a book like that. It seems like now it sounds weird that he would do that, but he did, and he kind of gave it his own spin and brought in some different characters, that sort of thing. Several of these original characters as well, they found their way into solo titles. So I know Grifter had a kind of a short, he had a couple of runs actually, and Spartan had like a 4-issue miniseries that revolved all around him. This first series of WildCATs, it really ran right up until DC Comics acquired Wildstorm Productions, which happened back in 1998 is when DC bought Wildstorm.
Yeah.
A second volume was launched, and that lasted 28 issues. And then there was a third series, which lasted 24 issues. I had never read any of those other than this, chunks of this first volume. I don't think I've ever read another volume of WildCATs beyond that.
Right.
In 2006, there was a fourth series that was launched, which that again had Lee coming on board and doing some of the penciling, and Grant Morrison was writing that.
Oh, okay.
I believe that only lasted one issue, though. I don't think it made it very... I don't think it made it very far. I could be mistaken about that. Now, in 2008, there was a fifth volume that launched, and that ran through issue 30.
Okay.
But again, I think I was still reading comics in 2008 at that time, but I don't recall picking any of that up.
Right.
In 2022, a 6th volume, I think, was launched. That ran for about 12 issues, if I'm not mistaken. So we've seen the WildCATs come and go over the years.
Right.
I believe it's always looked a little bit different than what we have here. It's never been necessarily the same core team members. There's always been sort of a different spin or a different take on it. I think part of the issue with the WildCATs, from that first series, or from when that first series ended, is that, especially when DC Comics bought Wildstorm, is that I just don't think the WildCATs fit in well with the DCU.
Yeah.
That's my own personal opinion. They, along with other Wildstorm properties, they just feel out of place in the greater DCU. And I think that they fit in much better with their own universe, where you don't have a Superman, a Wonder Woman, a Batman, running around.
Yeah.
And I don't know that DC would allow that necessarily. I know that I believe with that last launch that they had, that 12-issue launch, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was intended as part of a kind of a separate Wildstorm universe. So I think that they've tried that, but DC today, I still don't think would really allow that to happen.
Yeah, I can't
widespread.
see that happening.
I do think that there is some crossover with the DC universe that does work. Like, there was a time, with the New 52, Martian Manhunter was a member of Stormwatch as part of that title, and I think Martian Manhunter, I think, fit in well with that concept and with that cast.
Yeah.
Like I said, DC, they had shut down kind of the Wildstorm imprint back in 2010. And then that's when they rebooted everything with kind of the New 52.
Yeah.
In 2017, they brought the Wildstorm imprint back, so to speak, as a standalone universe. But in 2021, it was all kind of like meshed back together with regular DCU continuity. So, aside from the comics, we already touched on the animated series, which lasted, like I said, 13 episodes. And that came out back in 94. So that was a couple years past. And like I said before, the voice directing was bad. The plotting was bad. The one storyline I do think it did well was Spartan's story, where it's like the second episode where he's reintroduced to kind of a past love of his life, but he's no longer the same person that he was, because now he's basically a cyborg. He's a robot body, and it's just his memories that are implanted, and the cherubim that she had fallen in love with is essentially on ice. And so I thought that was done pretty well. Like I said, you can watch it for free on Tubi. It's not going to, ads, but it's not going to take up a lot of your time.
Right.
There was a terrible toy line from Playmates. Did you see any of those back in the 90s?
Yeah.
And I think McFarlane Toys had a lot of influence on Playmates toys at that time, just in terms of the design aesthetic, because what you got was figures with really bad articulation that were like pre-posed in like squatty positions, and they look good displayed, or they look good, but from a playability aspect of it, they're just not very good.
Well, and I always, you talk about like dumping out your toy box and just having fun with it.
Yeah.
I always, would have like my Batman figures interact with my like X-Men figures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, I always liked that playability, like the posability and stuff.
That's
like
what
that.
I loved about Toy Biz figures, is just how well they all, even your Spider-Man line, your Iron Man line, your Captain America line, your X-Men or X-Force lines, they were all different. They had some different play action features, but they all looked really good together. You could play them really good together. I wish I still had my Toy Biz figures from when I was a kid.
too.
Those things are long gone. And I'm sure at some point with my sickness, I will go back and try to collect them again.
Right.
It's inevitable.
Right.
So, I guess, so what are your final thoughts on the issue as we wrap up?
I would definitely read more, I think it'd be nice to find a full run of volume 1.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to pick that up again.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't look up. I don't know if with a lot of these early 90s Image comics, like, I don't think there's really a lot of trade
I don't think there is
editions
either.
of them like you find with, there's not an omnibus or necessarily, or
you see that more with I think if any image property, you see that more with Spawn than you do with anything else.
Oh, yeah. So I know Spawn was definitely collected. I think Savage Dragon has probably been collected at this point. But yeah, you didn't see that with, I mean, I don't know of any Youngblood collections or Shadowhawk collections. And again, if I'm wrong, let me know and send them to me and I'll read them.
If there's one out there, I'd love to.
Yeah,
I'd love to
check those out. I think, as far as number one issues go, considering that this is a number one issue and a brand new continuity, it's not bogged down by anything that would have come before. The art's Jim Lee, so that's a win there. The plotting is ambitious, but I think overall it works. And so definitely check it out. Like I said, as soon as I got done reading this, I was like, oh, I got to read issue 2 now, and I had that in my collection, so I was like, I got to crack that open and see what happened. And that's probably one of the biggest compliments I can give a monthly comic book is if it makes you want to open or read the next issue, it's doing its job.
Well, especially issue number 1 of a brand new established team or hero or something like that. It has to hook you in.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, agreed. So be sure to check this out. Again, like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at the number1podcast.com. No, the number1comicspodcast.com. Son of a bitch. I'm going to get this right someday. You think I came up with the name of the show, you think I'd at least get it right every once in a while.
That's fine.
But special thanks to all you guys for giving this a watch or a listen. Find us on Apple Podcasts as well, part of the Field of Geeks network. Special thanks to Josh and everybody at Field of Geeks for helping make this podcast happen. Special thanks to Raven X for the theme music at the beginning there. Appreciate it, guys, and we will see you next time. Take care.